Good evening and welcome to Athens City Council. It's Monday, August 26, 7:03 p.m. We are in a committee session tonight, and we'll be having a committee of the whole followed by two other individual committees. Our first item of business for committee of the whole is the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, and we have our city planner, Paul Logue, with us. Council members do have some documents on their shared drive, a copy of a resolution, and also some instances of expenses, I believe. So thank you, Paul, for being with us.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council. I'm here this evening speaking on behalf of the Athens County Regional Planning Commission, of which I serve as president of the County Planning Commission. I'm working closely with the county planner, as well as the county 911 and many other stakeholders throughout Athens County. It's 2019, and we are due for an update of our county-wide multi-jurisdictional natural hazards mitigation plan. If you look on that document, there's a link to review the current plan, which was adopted back in 2014. It's a multi-jurisdictional plan, which means that we have a consolidated plan that we submit to Ohio EPA and then to FEMA. And within that multi-jurisdictional plan, all of the villages as well as the townships and the cities within Athens County are included. And so what we're doing right now, we're working through our planning for this document. We got a late start this year. We received funding, or the county received funding, to hire a consultant to do the planning for us, and they recently hired Bob Eichenberg of Round River Planning to do that project. However, we were expecting that funding to be awarded in early 2019, but because of a federal government shutdown, those funds were not released actually until about a month ago. And so they could not get a planner or a consultant under contract until those funds were released and approved through both the feds and then down through the state. And so we're trying to scramble. They didn't move the deadline for when the plan had to be adopted, which means that it needs to be adopted by all the jurisdictions within Athens County by the end of 2019 in order for it to be approved by FEMA in first quarter of 2020. Failure to have an adopted plan, failure to get a plan through FEMA in that time frame could have significant cost to the city during any type of a natural hazard event. And if you see on the document I included here, the spreadsheet with the yellow highlight, that shows some of the federal funds we received from the flooding event that we had in early 2018. We received about over $200,000 of federal funds. Had we not had an adopted county hazard mitigation plan at that time, we would not have received those funds. And about 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, we had issues due to some changes at the state with actually having our countywide plan was delayed, and the city of Nelsonville at that time had a flood event, and they could not get federal funding for about 9 months until after that event because the plan was still being reviewed by the state of Ohio. And so this evening, what we're trying to do is just give you a very quick crash course in what we're doing through the planning process, and then ask that starting in October, we expect to have a draft of this plan brought forward to City Council, as well as all the village councils around the county, as well as the county commissioners, and ask that we begin the process of readings to adopt that plan so that we have a final product by ideally late November, early December of 2019. Any questions so far? Yes.
Go ahead.
Do we already have a plan, since you mentioned that prior?
We do, yes. Yeah, we have an adopted plan. It's available on the city's website. City Council would have adopted it. It's a nice 150-page document right here. Here's a copy of it. It is a multi-jurisdictional, so it went through this process at City Council as well as all the villages, and then was sent up to the state.
So are we making substantial changes to that?
Not really. No, it is an update of this plan. So a lot of the language in the plan will probably more or less stay the same. There are a little bit of changes. What we're doing is double checking all of our outreach. So right now we have an online survey for community members throughout the county to complete. There's links as well in that document. Our government channel has done a great job of getting the word out on that through the city's social media and websites. And then we're trying to spread the word on that. We have about 100 people who've completed that. And then we also have a second online survey that is about to go, targeted specifically to leaders and stakeholders in the county emergency management system. So that would be everybody from safety directors to mayors to township trustees for managing roadways, county commissioners, emergency services people, people within all the school districts around the county, Red Cross, Ohio University, the hospitals, people like that we're trying to double check how their responses are and what they're prepared to do during an event, and then try to get them to think about ways that they can improve their response issues. So a lot of that will go in. We'll also have new data that's coming from the state, and our emergency 911's handling that. There are some updates as far as what they're looking at as what they define as a natural hazard. Previously, it was almost all weather related, but they've also changed some of that, and they want us to look at things like invasive species and the impacts of that. So that could be anything from invasive ticks, which we know that those are a natural hazard in some ways. Invasive species, more poison ivy, more weeds of that nature that can have effects on our community, can have impacts on our farming, can have impacts on our livestock, and then the typical things we expect: cold, heat, wind, flooding, things of that nature.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilmember Crowell.
Yes, thank you for being with us here today. On your list of, in the spreadsheet of the hazard risk assessment, and you
Yes.
have maybe a dozen different possible hazards. Are those created by FEMA or the federal government, or are these things that we think, flooding, earthquake, high winds, are these things,
Sure.
things that are risks here?
It's a combination of both. A lot of this information is based on we started with the 2014 plan for all of that, where there was a lot of stakeholder engagement done at that point as well. The 2014 was the first year, I believe, that we did a consolidated plan. Prior to that, each community had to do their own. And what we got to was a point where there were some communities that didn't have the capacity to do it.
Yeah.
The county planner was trying to do it. The last time the city did it on its own, I believe, was when we had Chief Troxel was our fire chief, and Ron Lucas was, I think he may have been the GIS manager at that point. The two of them kind of spearheaded that, working with former Mayor Rick Abel. And then when this one came up, the the state was recommending that we consolidate, since typically natural hazard, when those come, it doesn't focus on one jurisdiction, especially if we've got flooding and cold or rain or something like that. It's going to hit a lot of us at once, and so it's an acknowledgement, especially in rural communities and rural areas, that we all need to start working together. And so we started collaborating with the 2014 plan. We took this information from that, and then as we go along and as we get feedback, we may be tweaking some of those numbers and some of that priority assessment. So if you do think that there's things that should be changed, this would be an opportunity as we're doing this planning to give us that feedback.
So if you do get, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
If you do get invasive species, for example, that would be approved by the federal government to add to this, or we can add whatever we think is a natural hazard?
We're probably going to be talking about some of those things regardless, just as known risks.
Yeah.
And some of those we don't know what the impacts of those are yet. When you talk about something like flooding or about cold, we know what those impacts can be when we get a severe event and a significant, we know that pipes will freeze. We know that roads are going to be hard to pass. We know that buildings will be damaged by flooding. We know that there's a lot of risks and that things will be closed and things like that. What we don't know is some of those other issues yet. What are the public health risks of Lyme disease, for example? We don't know how much of that or how fast it's going to spread. Climate change is another issue that we've seen in some of the FEMA documents that they're asking that we start discussing, and some of those are impacts that we don't quite have our hands around yet. Some of that we can expect that we'll see more of these type of events. Right. And so we need to be prepared for that as well.
Okay, Councilmember Reisner, then Councilmember Fall.
Yes, my question is, I was looking at the planning committee members, going down the list and their various areas of expertise. I didn't see anyone from any of the hospitals or clinics. Wouldn't that be sort of a thing that you'd want to be talking to?
We will be talking to them. That is a good point, though. I will certainly bring that up with Jessie Powers, the county planner, to let her know that. But we will be talking with those people as part of this planning process. Yeah, and it's possible, and I don't want to speak on her behalf. She organized a lot of the planning. My guess is that some of those members were invited and said that they could not attend, and so we started working with those who came to the meeting and saying this is the people that are going to help us get it through.
Councilmember Fall?
Thank you. I think that this is essential, especially given the climate crisis that we are enjoying right now. And I think that it's heartening that FEMA would actually have those words within any of their directives now. So that's climate change, which is really good. I would emphasize that there are so many unknowns with the coming crisis that we have to be able to do different types of scenarios. And I think a good thing is looking at sudden blooming of malarial mosquitoes because they were blown in from someplace, or the Zika mosquitoes and those sort of things. Because right now I think there's a lot of out in the neighborhoods, it's like, oh well, it's okay. I don't have to worry about mosquitoes. They don't bother me too much, and those sort of things. So there's going to be a good chunk of public education when it comes through forward with this sort of thing. I get a lot of people complaining about mosquitoes, especially this wet year. I think this is going to be more of the common thing as opposed to the uncommon. So I'm very, I'm glad that you're looking specifically at climate crisis and to go forward, to go and do some scenario planning. So.
And we have a lot of support to your point, Councilmember Fall. We do have a lot of support from the Athens City County Health Department. They're very actively involved with this planning. And as you're well aware, that when we have our planning commission meetings and things like that, they are constantly giving us updates on those threats from mosquitoes and ticks and things like that.
Because that's happening now.
There are, yeah. That Asian tiger mosquito that thing just needs a turned up bottle cap, and it'll breed all day long.
Okay. Councilmember Katsas.
Yes, thank you. And this isn't directly aimed at the plan, but you mentioned right at the very beginning that you're a little bit, and you're a little bit behind the eight ball,
right,
in that you're starting this kind of late. And I just want people to recognize that when we had that government shutdown back in February, it wasn't that just people just got, federal employees got furloughed for that period of time. There was this ripple effect, because I've seen this in other in other grant cycles and other agencies that are still trying to play catch up after that process.
Yeah. And to that point, we feel really good about what we need to do to get things loaded up for council and for the villages. To have this done in 2019, we do have the existing plan is really well written. We know that one's good. We've got some other models of some that have already been approved for the new cycle through the state of Ohio's EPA. So we were able to rely on those, and then we have some really good guidance from the state as well as from the feds. And so we're following that template, and we're plugging in what we need to plug in and collecting the data that we need to collect. You'll see on the request for council's assistance that I have listed on here, most of this is information that we already have. The key thing really for council is being willing to start getting an ordinance done once we have that draft in October. That's really the important part for council. As far as collecting data that we're asking for, essential services, things along those lines, recent developments, all of those things we already have. We've got Chief Reimers working on, he's on the steering committee with us, and so we've got a lot of information from him, and there's not much really that we'll be needing data that we don't already have.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing the actual report then, and with the resolution then on October. Any other last comments before we move on? Yes, Councilmember McGee.
Just one question. Is the City of Athens going to be contributing any funding to this
No.
report at all? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess my time would be one of them.
We appreciate it.
My intern, one of my interns, Alicia Lundy Morris, she's helped by creating all the online surveys for us. And I would encourage council to complete the survey. That's the link. If I can email this to everybody as well, if you need that, and then feel free to share that with people. Right now, I think we have about 100 people from the countywide that have completed it. But the more information we get from the public, the better off we're going to be.
Good. Yeah, we'd appreciate having the link, and we can put that up on the government channel as well, the website.
Will do, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we're ready to move on to the Affordable Housing Commission. And I know we have some members from the commission here tonight, and Paul, and then also Councilmember Grace.
Thank you, President Isley. I have some handouts to give to everyone. But then, as I serve as council member, but also serve as chair of the Affordable Housing Commission, and this is our presentation to you this evening. I thought perhaps I would go to the podium to feel a little bit more like I'm talking to you all.
Sure. I think that's the 4-pager. Yeah, I got that. Yep, I got it.
So just by way of introduction, several years ago, the Athens City and Ohio University Affordable Housing Task Force began meeting, and the City of Athens, along with cities, municipalities across the country, are all trying to figure out the best ways to address the issue of affordable housing. What are some things that we can do as representatives, as city officials? What can we do to address the problem of affordable housing in our communities? So the City of Athens, Ohio University Task Force met. They did a lot of research. They did a lot of work. They studied what is happening in other places, other towns, other cities, other university towns. They looked at housing trends and reports that had been conducted analyzing housing needs within the City of Athens. And on December 1st, 2016, they published a report including some recommendations. And that was presented to Council. And following that, the Council created the Affordable Housing Commission. And I have had the privilege of serving as the chair of that commission. And I'm very grateful that there are several members of the commission here in the audience this evening. And we've met over the past year with the task of creating actionable items out of the task force report. What could the city do? What are some real actions that we could take? And so what you have in front of you is the recommendations for actions on the part of the city from the Affordable Housing Commission. And just briefly, one thing that we know that is a significant factor in Athens is that 77% of the housing stock is rental property in the city. And on average, 25 companies a year come to Athens seeking to establish a business here. And many of them struggle, and some choose not to establish their businesses here because they're concerned about availability of housing for their employees should they come here. And so this is important to our community for economic development, and that is certainly backed up by reports from our economic development community. And one thing that was very clear is that due to some city regulations, the cost of land, and scarcity of land in some cases, developers can't develop affordable housing in the price points. Like they can't come and develop it and then sell it within the affordable housing criteria that we are looking at. And as a commission, and on the recommendations of the task force, what we categorized as affordable housing was from the $125,000 to $250,000 price point for purchasing of a home. And we want to be sure that that includes starter homes, retirement homes, homes for those facing mobility challenges, and that are accessible to people who otherwise cannot afford housing. And getting down to the nitty-gritty, Our recommendations. The city should establish a housing and redevelopment department with dedicated staff that could perhaps be housed within an existing entity, either an existing city entity, but we think that it's really important that the city have a dedicated staff, even of one person, for whom this is their job, to look for funding, to look for opportunities. The second recommendation is that the Affordable Housing Commission should be maintained, that is us, the volunteers on the commission, and serve it as an advisory body for the Housing and Redevelopment Department. And the city should support public-private partnerships for establishing housing developments that meet specified criteria for price, percentage of units with universal design, and sustainability. And we recommend utilizing several measures, including some zoning modifications, incentives, tax incentives, other perhaps expedited permitting, and possibly some grants or revolving loan funds. And when appropriate, the city should also consider annexation to build capacity, and perhaps revising impact fees and permitting. We've studied maps of the city, and that was probably our funnest meeting, most fun, where we had big maps spread out on the table and just looking at available spaces within the city. And the spaces that we recommend be considered for development are at University Estates, the Ridges, the area known as Oakmont 4, and there's a few small areas of city-owned property that would be suitable for very small developments. In addition to supporting new development, as a commission, we all felt that it was very important that the city actively look for opportunities to support revitalization efforts. And we believe that could be done through tax incentives to individuals for purchase and rehabilitation of existing homes. And when those incentives are provided, there would then be a contingency of owner occupancy attached to that. And we believe the city should also consider the acquisition of current or former rental properties that could be converted to single-family homes that would then also have that owner occupancy required. We have a couple of examples of pilot projects that would utilize some of these recommendations. And the first one is the University Estates. And then the second one is some housing up on the Ridges. And we're fortunate to have a representative from the university serving on the commission with us. She's unable to be here tonight, but she was able to provide some information on some plans for that project, including that the targeted areas would be historic buildings 2, 3, 4, and 5 that would be targeted for senior and affordable housing. And the university is exploring public-private partnerships for that. And some of the incentives for success that she sees as necessary are rezoning, some historic tax credits, and DRD. So that's the quick overview, and I'm sure that other members of the commission are happy to answer questions or fill in gaps that I may have left, if anyone has any.
Councilmember Reisner, and then Paul.
Given that Ohio University is going through a period of declining enrollment, the trend is definitely down, do you see that having any impact on the housing stock? If there's the number of students decline, that means the number of homes that are now being used as rentals will be unoccupied, theoretically. Yes. Could they not be then refurbished back to
that is certainly
dwelling?
Something we've discussed at several meetings. And while we as a city like to see continuing solid enrollment numbers for Ohio University, I think we can also look at this as an opportunity for possibly doing some of the neighborhood revitalization and possibly acquiring some of those rentals that are no longer in demand as student rentals, and to transition them back to an owner-occupied house. So yes, that's something that in this scope of offering affordable housing, that's the slow and steady approach, because you have to wait for the opportunities. And so that's part of why we think there should be someone actively watching for opportunities for this, because we believe that those opportunities are coming and are likely to be increasing in the near future. Yes, please. Yes. Well, highlight our height difference here.
Well, good evening again, Council. Paul Logue, planner for the city. I also serve on the Housing Commission. To your question, Councilmember Reisner, we discussed that in great detail, and anecdotally, I think we're already seeing that. There's a lot of houses that are literally for rent today on the first day of classes that are typically leased 6 months or a year prior to the first day of classes. How many that is, we don't know yet. What we talked about it through the Housing Commission is that what our strategy was to kind of look at what can we do, number one, with land that already exists that's ready to build on. And so that what you're seeing before you right now is that discussion. What is ready to go? And then once we took care of this and basically took this off of our agenda, then we can start talking about how do we address housing that already exists that needs to be addressed, and how do we get some of these neighborhoods revitalized and all of that. That to us seems to be a really complicated equation. One of the biggest factors that complicates it is that you need to somehow acquire real estate. And without a fund of money to interject ourselves into the market, then how we see housing come for sale, and we can all say to ourselves, everybody in this room and on that commission can say, that would be a perfect house for somebody to acquire, invest $20,000 or whatever that number may be, and retrofit into something that might be ready for as a family rental, or for a young couple or somebody moving to the city who's looking for or who has a new job. But without having that capital to get in there, we didn't feel like we were really prepared to address that. We think that's a really heavy burden or a heavy lift, and so that's what we're ready to start moving on and researching better and better understanding how we can actually do that. But we thought that since there is available housing, we look at the green spaces, which is already zoned for housing, things like that, and say, what are the complications to actually moving something forward there? And so that's where we started having conversations with developers. We have a realtor on our commission, Susan Bargy was in here. She's still in here?
She's here.
There's Susan. We had a housing finance expert from Ohio University Credit Union serve, and we had all these people, and so we started saying, how do we do things? What's the problems with our existing structure that is prohibiting us from actually building more housing? And so that's where we started. That's what this report is about, is what are the barriers that we're hearing as far as getting these price points with new construction in Athens. And then we're going to, once we move on from that, we want to say, what are the barriers to getting homes retrofitted so that we can hit these price points again?
Okay. We've got Councilmember Fall and then Councilmember Butler.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, especially to Sarah. She took that ball and just really ran with this. It was when the Housing Commission was developed, it's a huge issue and a huge project, and I want to say thank you to all the people who worked before the establishment of the commission on the ad hoc committee, and also the people that you've been working with. So thank you very much, because this is huge. When I was thinking along the lines of what Jeff was saying, that also I think that it's really good to point out that sustainability is really a key issue here, because sometimes in the past it seemed like affordable housing was garbage housing, and they just slapped it up, and then people ended up having bills to repair and horrendous electricity bill. We can't do that anymore, not in the future that we're going to be looking at. So I'm really happy that that is part of the equation, and I encourage you even to go more forward with it. I think that we did talk about the tax information financing that we are doing with Capstone Realty up at the University Estates. I think that's a great model to be looking at for future. There are some models like in New England where its density increases, coupled with protection maybe of open space to be able to balance those issues out, because whenever you talk about green space turning into housing, there are concerns about loss of green space. And in our community, we can do something about that by doing smart development and smart design. And also, when we start looking at the R1 issues, there are many communities out there that are looking at grandmother apartments and those sort of things. And so that's going to be something that people are going to have to get kind of a hold of, because a lot of our rentals are like grandmother-in-law apartments ready to happen. So that's going to be something, the accessory building issue and stuff are going to be part of that. And so I look forward to working with you if you guys would like. And thank you for all your work.
Okay. Councilmember Butler.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation this evening. Much needed. I'd like to thank your work as well as former Councilmember Pappy, who helped get the ball moving with the previous administration, both here and with the university. I think it's exciting to consider that there might be dedicated staff working towards these goals. There's models out there that Councilmember Fall alluded to that City Planner Paul Logan and I have talked about 10, 11 years ago when we approached this prior to the study. For example, in Breckenridge, Colorado, affordable housing for knowing that you're up on a mountaintop and that you need first responders nearby, that you need essential teaching staff, personnel, city employees, street emergency crews, that you create incentives for them to live nearby and live in the center of your community. I think that's a good model to pursue and look at as well. I would really be, I'm hopeful that we can look towards public-private partnerships. I think that if the university, the city, as well as local banks, realtors, if we get together and we could create that pot of money to incentivize these purchases and then identify streets within our communities that we want to focus on so that we do have that smart growth and smart shrink. So I'm excited. I'm hopeful that we can pursue some of these recommendations and make them reality. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Katsas and then Councilmember McGee.
Thank you. And I think a lot of people have kind of already touched on this, but I did want to circle back to that idea that, to support revitalization, the city is, there's a suggestion of the city acquiring properties. And I guess I want to make sure that there is some private. I can't imagine that the city wants to do that from start to finish. Is there some sort of partnership or some? Maybe I'm going into the weeds and that hasn't been necessarily hashed out, but.
Well, that's not something that then the city would maintain ownership of the properties long-term, at least in terms of what we've discussed in commission, but it's more to serve as a vehicle to acquire them and perhaps partner with an entity for the rehabilitation or the resale, but so that then there would be some restrictions attached so that it would be an owner-occupied for anyone who takes advantages of incentives that the city is able to offer for those. So it's to prevent them from just turning over and continuing to decline. But not as a permanent city-owned property, if that makes sense.
I could almost see that if the city had success with one or two properties, would we find that we might have some competition to attempt to try to do the same thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. But
that would be great.
yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
As far as how that may be organized, Councilmember Katsas, we don't have a great handle on that yet, whether it be the city working with other partners to create another entity, a nonprofit organization, or some sort of a housing development corporation who's tasked with that mission of acquiring real estate, rehabbing it, and then turning it over to a new buyer and doing that deed restriction or something like that, or having qualifying factors where it has to be owner-occupied for the next 10 years and things like that. And then you try to line that up possibly with financing from local banks who may give a discount on interest rates or down payment assistance, in order to make that happen, as long as there's some agreements with it. How that might work, we're still not, like I said, we're not 100% sure how we should structure that, but you're not getting into the weeds. Those are the things that we're ready to start talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember McGee.
Thank you. I would like to thank you for all the hard work you've done. And I know Sarah's done an awful lot of work on this.
She has.
And again, I applaud you. I am concerned about several things. One thing I'm concerned about, having seen a lot of turnover in the neighborhoods, is the fact that perhaps you're not really focusing on another aspect of the problem, which is the fact that students are leaving the university dormitory system for a reason, and perhaps we should be asking the students why and what the university could do perhaps to make the dorms more attractive to the students. And I know they could do certain things. I know there's some policy issues there as to, for instance, how severe you want to enforce certain things, like the marijuana laws, for instance, when the university busts a lot of students for for smoking in the dorms or near the dorms. And I think, again, it's the kind of thing, if you're going to make the university dormitories attractive, you have to make, I think it would have a great impact on the demand for housing. The other factor that I think, and I'm glad a real estate agent is here, I've noticed that over the years a lot of real estate agents pushed the thing about to out-of-towners to invest in Athens, buy the house so you could do your quick turnover, put your kid through college for free basically by renting out the house and having a lot of roommates, so that the cost of a bed is now like $700, so you have a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom house. You're bringing in $2,100, $2,800 a month. People can't compete with that. The local people can't compete with that kind of thing. So again, it's a question of, who's pushing what and why are we doing this to our community? So I hope the real estate agents and the real estate lobby takes that into effect, because their actions has a great impact upon the city of Athens, as does the university with their policies as well. So thank you.
Councilmember Crowell.
Again, thank you for your work. I want to, I'm sure that the Housing Commission didn't just look at the recent trends in enrollment, but considered growth too, right? I mean, we know that, I know the city of Blacksburg, Virginia Tech did a lot to change their enrollment. They've got 1,500 more students than they expected, and they're putting kids in hotel rooms. So we know things swing both ways, right? So we don't want to just prepare for lower enrollment, but prepare for growth too. And so the smart growth, the smart shrink, those are great things. And I just wanted to say that your addendum is some of these incentives, zoning, density bonus, property taxes, the parking reduction, big one, the fee waiver. These are all great things I'd love to see as part of going forward. But thank you.
I think that many of those are things that the city is already and council is already considering with our first step with University Estates, that there will be some zoning changes necessary, and the TIF we're already the great thing about having had a task force and an administration and a council that are all working on this issue is that as the commission is working and coming up with our recommendations, that some of them are going to be able to be put to action right away, I think. So, and I think that's a great thing, because we are paying attention to the need, and so I think we're going to have an opportunity to see how well some of these ideas work.
And those are things that council has, the people in this room have control over, city council and the mayor's administration. Those are all things that we can actually enact, rather than saying, how do we get banks to do something, or how do we get somebody else? These are actually things that we have control over. And so if we want to be a part of these solutions, some of this just legislative changes and administrative changes, and we'll see, we can start from there.
Councilmember Butler.
Thank you.
Had another question.
I'll just briefly acknowledge that even in the short time since the study was completed, River's Edge Apartments was completed near campus. we have 3 or 4 major complexes that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. Right. The Summit at Coates Run, University Courtyard Apartments, River's Edge, investments by LaRue Properties and Athens, Ohio Rentals near campus. Those didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. And consequently, we do have many smaller homes in our near neighborhoods that I think would be great investments and incentivization for what we're talking about. Thank you.
Mayor Patterson.
I support this document 100%. I think the recent trip that we took up to Traverse City to go look at the Kirkbride building in Traverse City and what is possible for our Kirkbride building here in the city of Athens with the ridges, there's a lot of opportunity for mixed use and in particular housing up there as well. I just to share, as I was going door to door this evening before council, I had a great conversation with an individual, and they asked me, so, what are your main things? And one of the first things I said is to work hard on affordable housing for people who want to retire in place, for individuals, young families who want to move here and are looking for housing. And the people I was speaking to said, that was us 2 years ago, trying to find a place to live. So this isn't anything new to the city of Athens. I think the timing is perfect. Actually, I think we're behind the power curve with our timing of this. But also to share with council, this is, people I think are starting to hear the need that we do have here in Athens. I received a call yesterday from an individual who's interested in some retirement housing here in Athens somewhere if they can find the right place for that. There weren't plans for where to go, but people are hearing it. People are hearing it. So I think with a plan like this, with the DRDs we have in place, with this great opportunity for the TIF, that's a neighborhood redevelopment for UE, there's been a lot of work that's gone into that and a lot of homework on our side, trying to figure out how do we do this the right way. And I think that we're really close and we're there. So again, I 100% support this. We have our new director for the Department of Development and Code Enforcement. He comes to us from the city of Mason. And in Mason, one of the things that he was responsible for was economic development and engaging with businesses to come. So I think we have a real opportunity with having David Riggs coming on board and to help think how can we streamline development, housing development as well. I think there's a lot of red tape that we can cut through and streamline some things. So thank you for your work on this. And again, the task force, which came forward, as you remember, council created almost a 2-inch thick document that was that pathway. So to see something a little more streamlined.
We tried.
And I think, it has been a daunting task from the time of, we've had conversations with planners before, as much as 20 years ago, and people have worked on it before, but this is really good to see partnerships and people being proactive about it. You're on the Planning and Development Committee on council, so in a good position in support of the other committee members to move some things forward and with the help of our planner. And just want to thank all the committee members too, because I know that was a huge task of saying, so what are we going to do? What do we want to? And as Councilmember Fall mentioned, a big thanks to Councilmember Pappy, who really
I
moved
think
from our first thoughts to a vision and next steps.
And I think it feels like something that we've been talking about and working on for a long time, and it's really encouraging because I think there really are we're going to see some action and some changes, some things happening, and that's partly due to all the work of all the entities that have looked for solutions and things that we as a city can do to address these. So
great, thank you.
Any other questions? Right. Do other members wish to share anything?
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Thanks. All right, we're finished with the items for Committee of the Whole, and we're now going to move on to Transportation Committee. So Chair Katsas and Council Members McGee and Crowell.
President Nisley, thank you. Sitting here and listening to the 30,000-foot view here that we just had, I'm going to bring it back down to the street level. And this is a special Halloween edition of the Transportation Committee. So this is all things Halloween because it's coming up. And so the first one that we have tonight is the AUBA, that is the Athens Uptown Business Association Trick or Treat, once again requesting a street closing for Trick or Treat on Court Street. And so Michelle Ostrike from the Athens Chamber of Commerce is here tonight to speak to that.
Hello, Michelle Ostrike, with President of the Athens Area Chamber of Commerce. I think this is the 4th or 5th year we've made this request. AUBA is the Athens Uptown Business Association, a committee of uptown businesses who are members of the chamber. They host trick-or-treating for families once a year. So this year we are requesting that to be held on Monday, October 28th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And the streets that we are requesting be closed are Court Street from Union to Carpenter, and Washington from Congress to the parking garage, and State Street from Congress to College.
Okay.
So that should be the same as it has been in the past.
All right.
Any questions? Yes.
Michelle, is Halloween the weekend before? Do we know?
That's next on the agenda, so I'm waiting for you guys to tell
we don't want
us.
to. Yeah,
don't wanna jump forward?
No, we can spoil that. It is 10/26. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I thought it was October 26th. What I
Yes.
don't know is when citywide trick-or-treating is.
That I can share.
Yes.
Okay.
It's going to be on the real holiday.
I thought so.
It's going to, and if I may, moving forward, trick or treat in the city of Athens is always going to be on October 31st, at least under my administration. It's
Great.
And we're also going to extend the hours from 5:30 to 7:30 because I heard from an awful lot of parents saying, why do my kids have to hustle so fast
Yeah.
in that 1 hour period of time, and they can't socialize? And that really
Right.
resonated with me. And so it's going to be extended from 5:30 to 7:30, and then we'll make some adjustments to the community centers event. So there you have it.
There you go.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Member
I
McGee.
would just like to thank you for all you do to host this particular event. To me, it's the greatest thing in Athens, and I love to see Court Street filled with the kids and the parents who come out for this. I've been doing it for a few years, passing out candies, and it is great fun. And if there are any students listening, I hope that they would participate too and just see it, because it's great.
Well, I really want to thank the businesses because they're the ones who
They do, yeah.
put out a lot of candy for the event. You think there's a lot of candy on the east side, it's way more down.
And I just want to add, as I was hearing these dates come through today, I think it's a perfect order in that the Saturday street closures are happening first, and then we have these two events,
Right.
both the Uptown Court Street and then the citywide Beggars Night happening the following week. I think it's a good order of process. So do we have any additional questions either here from the audience on this one? Yes.
I'd just like to maybe add something to the pie here for the street closing for the Halloween, with the students and everything. I know last year we had a little bit of difficulty with the funding for the stage and the security for the stage, and I hope that, I'm not sure who's doing it, but I know that when the organizers went around, they were complaining about the city perhaps not having contributed to helping out, and I think it's certainly something that needs to be done. Thank you.
Well, let's thank Michelle Ostrike for coming this evening, and then we can move directly into this topic. So thank you so much for coming this evening, and we'll be moving forward with the ordinances for those closures. So yes, the second bullet point is that Saturday street closure on Court Street, and my understanding this is going to be a standard, a similar closure to what we've done in past. This is on Saturday, October 26th. This is the date that we're anticipating.
It is, and all the street closings, as you mentioned, and other ordinances that we suspend, the vending, the noise ordinance, that will also be coming forward as well. To Councilmember McGee's point about the city paying for, the organizer or contributing money to the organizer, Patrick, please remember that we are to the tune of almost $60,000 because of law enforcement, city services getting out there to close the street, for power, for a number of things. As I understand it, there was some hiccups last year, and at the 11th hour for the city to come forward and help with funding, one, we couldn't do it because we couldn't turn fast enough to do that. And number two, this year there was more planning that went into it, and they had a longer run towards having this happen. I would contend that something like Ohio Brew Week's last call, to where they get sponsorship to pay for the event, that Ohio Clean and Safe should be doing the same thing. Because again, the city, we pay a lot of money for services just to make sure that that event is as safe as we can possibly make it. There you have it. But again, the same level of ordinances will be coming forward for noise, vending, and the street closing.
I have a question concerning that. Is there a point man that the people from the Halloween Safe Committee can go to work this out in advance? Because it seemed to me they shut down one stage, I think, and they were talking at one point in time of not having any stages. So, I mean, I don't want to see that kind of thing happen at the last minute where everything falls apart and what people anticipate when they're coming to Athens just doesn't happen. So if there's a point man or a committee that they can really focus in on with the city, I'd be happy to refer them to it.
They do. Brandon Thompson meets with Ron Lucas almost monthly on the planning for this particular event. And Brandon is also in the room when we start talking about our safety measures for this level of street closing. Like any mayor across this nation, things of which we saw happen in Dayton 2 months ago, or a month ago, or whatever, is something to where we're always focused on that too with this particular event. So there's a lot of meetings that go into this. It's not something that happens overnight.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I also want to talk, just as we were having this conversation about, looking to next year and the street closures as a whole. Would Halloween also be kind of included in that whole process when we're trying to talk about getting everybody on the same page and really getting that calendar set up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's because it's the same promoter for what we see with the last call that'll be there for the Halloween. So it'll be, again, our intent is in January, have the calendar sitting there, all the event planners and organizers, they come to a singular meeting and we go through who's going to land where for all the different events that we have throughout the entire year, and Halloween's one of them.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Any other additional questions from here or from the audience? Okay. With that, we are done with the Transportation
We'll move on to
Committee.
Planning and Development, and that's Councilmember Fall as the chair, and Councilmembers Reisner, McGee, and Grace.
Thank you. We have a full agenda this evening. I would like to start with a discussion about the short-term rental. For a long time, we've been talking about Airbnbs, actually all sorts of B&Bs, bed and breakfasts. We have changed our code in the past concerning bed and breakfasts, but we know that there are Airbnbs or short-term rentals happening right now in the city. And so we need to take this opportunity to be able to regulate them, ensure safety, and ensure the rights and property values of neighbors. So I've been working for the past year with various people out in the community, also with the comprehensive plan that's been going forward. There's been discussion with that, looking at what comments and stuff. So I've put together a short-term rental, several short-term rental ordinances. And tonight I'm going to talk about the first one that needs to happen before anything else goes through. The short-term rentals is going to be a multi-pronged approach. First is that the code for the zoning code, Title 23, needs to be changed to allow for any sort of discussion to go forward about what the ordinance that I've developed as a draft to be able to go forward as something that the city council can vote on. So what we've put together is a resolution, a one-reading resolution that will go to the Planning Commission to ask them for these specific changes. And basically, those changes are dealing with things as a permitted use and as a permitted use versus like an accessory use. And so most of it is changes in the various wording about what a permitted accessory use is in R3s and R2 areas, also in R1 areas. R3s don't have to change so much because we are already allowing various types of bed and breakfasts in R3s and business zones, but some of it, a lot of it has to do with R1s. So there's definitions that are also going to go in to be looked at by the Planning Commission, and then once they've looked at it, change the code, Title 23, which is the zoning code, to allow for discussion, further discussion about the ordinance that will be brought forward probably in 2 weeks' time. So people are, so one thing I want to get across from the very beginning, this is the start of a long conversation with public. There's going to be hearings at the Planning Commission, and then there'll be information committee meetings and meetings during City Council for public to be able to put in. I've met with a lot of people through this process, and so there has been a lot of public input into it through the process of writing a draft ordinance. I'm putting a draft ordinance out there because I think that it's easier to understand what the responsibilities and the rights and the regulations that all the members and all the parties that happen when we do something like a short-term rental. So that they're put out, that people know their responsibilities, that they know the regulations, they know the protections that are there for property owners and neighbors, so that it's a very upfront and process-oriented discussion. So that's pretty much what I'm going to be presenting on Monday, is the resolution. So, Steve, would you like to talk about what would you like at the Planning Commission?
We'll see your resolution.
Yep. And some of the ideas that you're hitting around that we talked about the other day. So, the process.
Oh, there is a process. For the Planning Commission, there's definitely a process. So once the Planning Commission receives a resolution from council, it'll trigger our process.
So all planning meetings are open to the public. It will have at least 2 meetings that it will come up in before the Planning Commission takes any sort of action upon it. It's also Planning Commission's right to be able to hold a public hearing. So once that happens, then the other ordinance can go forward in the introduction, the committee meetings, those sort of things to go forward. So, questions? I passed everything out. So.
I'm just curious whether you are coordinating this issue with the housing, the low-income housing office there, with Sarah.
Well, I think many of the issues that we've talked about this evening, low income, moderate income housing, affordable housing, reduction of students, our revitalization of neighborhoods, have a lot to do with also short-term rentals. Short-term rentals are here. They're not going away. We have to regulate them, otherwise the city is going to be open up to possible litigation. We have to do something. We can't just say it's not going to happen, because it is. But I would argue that we need to make sure that they're regulated so that they're safe, that the neighborhood, it remains safe and community-oriented, and that the community gets benefit out of this. All short-term rentals will have to pay transient guest tax. It's a way of making sure people who do have short-term rentals right now are pay what they need to pay. Hotels, small hotels are paying it right now. That's an issue of fairness. It also helps to diversify the income for a lot of people. Maybe instead of an empty nester having to move out to the county because they can't afford their housing anymore, they can do something like have a homestay or rent out one of their rooms for a bed and breakfast sort of thing, a B&B, and help to diversify those sort of income streams so that people may not have to leave and may be able to stay in their homes, fix up homes, those sort of things, which all those opportunities for people to come in and improve and revitalize neighborhoods is an opportunity we need to grab, because we need to diversify the income and the types of housing, jobs, living that we have in the community. Any other questions? Okay. So I will bring that resolution up on Tuesday. I will bring it up. It's a one reading resolution. So next on the agenda is the Commission on Disabilities. They have brought forward the ordinance that found their organic ordinance, which is a way of saying the ordinance that made them into a commission in the city. They would like to have changes. Mostly it's changes having to do with various days that are in the ordinance, basically looking at when appointments are made, when the appointments start, the time, because all commissions have a time limit that people are appointed for that board or commission, and also the Athena award, the timing for that to go forward. So it's basically just timing and changes.
There was, yes, it's cleanup language in there. There's also, there was a couple events that the Commission on Disabilities held, Disabilities Speaks, and Challenge by Choice. Challenge by Choice, the Commission got together and felt that while it was somewhat beneficial to individuals, that it was contrived and it was time to rethink that event. They'll still have the Athena Award event, which is wonderful, to recognize someone who goes above and beyond in advocacy or working with individuals with disabilities. So, but the rest of it was cleanup. I've looked through it and I've given it the okay on my end, but it's before council now to approve.
Questions? No. I will go forward as first reading. The next thing is the Title 35 ordinance, which is a repeal and replace. This is one of those things that we don't have a choice really about, because especially when it comes to certain types of utilities, they are controlled and regulated at much different levels than we little people in the city have any control over. You know, the Federal Utilities Commission or the you know, state utilities commissions and those sort of things. They have deemed it that we have to change our cable communications ordinances fairly drastically. So it's a full repeal and replace at this time. This came down from Washington, D.C., my understanding.
You can call it what you want. It's a preemption.
It's a preemption, yeah, and it's a big preemption.
The Fed is preempting the city of Athens through the FCC when it comes to our cable franchises.
And ultimately, it means that we're losing out on the ability to be able to get money from these entities to help run things like our government channel and some of those things. Jeffrey, I know that this is one of your...
I just wonder if you could, in a nutshell, in 25 words or less, explain what we're losing and what's replacing it.
We're losing ability to garner money and certain types of benefits for them being able to do almost anything they want. So it's a power grab too. So it's the replace is 9 pages. So it's a long convoluted, but it is basically like when we did small cell. They get to come in. They are going to have limits based on the amount of money that is available. They used to have to do a certain percentage. They're not going to have to do that. They can do part of it as a share on their various utility equipment, the various equipment. So if they have certain channels, they won't have to give us any of the franchise money and those sort of things. So it's limiting the amount of ability for us to be able to get certain public benefits because they're getting a huge public benefit from being able to run their wires and do all the things that they have to do in the public domain. Questions? So this is one of those things I would put forward as we are doing it under duress.
Did this come through an FCC rule change, or did Congress actually modify the?
It's an FCC.
FCC.
So it's a rule change.
It is a rule change.
So if in 2020, if there is a God, Trump is thrown out of office.
We can change it back.
A new president comes in and says, okay, I have a new appointment for the FCC. The old board is now out because it's, by law, it has to be a majority who's in charge, which right now is the Republican Party. 3 members are Republican, 2 are Democrat. The chair is a Republican. And
I think the chair used to be a lobbyist for one of them, Verizon when it was Verizon, or
Right.
any of those. He was a lobbyist.
yeah, but the point I'm getting to is if the administration changed, this rule could be reversed.
Yes, it could be made better for communities.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not
We hope.
totally hopeless, just practically hopeless.
For the next couple of years, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's not hopeless from the Ohio Municipal League either. I mean, know this, that OML and Kent Scarrett is working on this. I'm working on this. There's a number of people, the National League of Cities is working on this and trying to do something about it to correct it, because as Member Fall was just indicating, for the 5% that comes from their revenue that goes to fund our ACTV and our franchises.
Which is about $65,000 a year.
Right, so now they're getting credited with services rendered, and they can count that as opposed to pay any money
Right.
to the city.
Exactly.
So it's a grab. It's a grab. It's complete.
Well, people
preemption
are
over the
abandoning
city.
cable television, so the revenues are declining on that end. So they have to come up with some way to grab money. Don't you have any sympathy for them?
your drops are falling. So, okay. Well, that will come Monday, Tuesday also. Okay, next on our is the the City Planning Commission's recommendation for zoning for the Hillcrest Drive annexation. Annexation is one of those very long, convoluted processes that we go through, and we go through it for a reason. because it gives parties the opportunities to be able to to let officials know how they feel, but also that it goes back and forth. And now the Planning Commission has looked at the zoning designation for Hillcrest Drive, and they would like to, from a vote 4-0, to recommend that it be an R1 zone. Surprise. So this will be another one that we will come up for. It's like almost the end of the annexation process. Then it will come forward to us and we'll say yay at the very end.
And the reason it was 4-0 was
It
because we had, a member absent. So just, I don't want anybody to read into that for some strange reason.
Okay, questions? Okay. And the last is a change in some wording of the county city sewer project, extension project that's been going on for years. Basically, it's a change of the amount of time somebody has to be repaid. The payment of said capacity fee shall occur within 730 days of the effective date. And so that will be a change in the ordinance. It's basically a change in the agreement. It's not a very big change, but it did have to go through. So, questions? Maybe someday this will be over.
How many years is 730 days? 2 years?
Two. Not quite.
Not
Yes,
quite two.
a little over.
Okay.
Okay. That's not there. I don't have my calculator. Okay. Questions? Concerns? Audience? Yeah. Just please tell us who you are.
While you're here.
Mary Abel, Strathmore Boulevard. We got a question. Could you please define for us what a short-term rental is and your definition for the ordinance coming forward? Are we talking about less than 30 days, a weekend, or how do you define that in the ordinance?
It's any rental for less than 30 days. So over 30 days, then it's considered a regular rental, and they have to go and get a rental permit. So
okay, thank you.
One of the reasons that I wanted to get some of this going forward is because of the timing and everything. And Planning Commission has a meeting soon that they will be able to put it on a communication that will put it on the next agenda. Then it will be discussed further. So it's more homework and kind of housekeeping. So, all the documents are also available. They're public, out in the public. So they're all on our drive, so all the council members have seen it. So, and I'm available for questions or anything. Okay. Other questions? Sorry, I just kind of cruised right through. I see 5 different things on the agenda. So, okay.
Okay.
I was just going to say, for clarity on the short-term rental, there will be different licenses that then allow for different amounts of time, but several of them are like no more than a total of 84 calendar or nights per calendar year. So it's not like they do 30 days and the person leaves for a day and comes back. So there are provisions to protect against things like that.
That midterm from 30 days to a year, some people, kind of the executive time rentals are not included in this. And that when the ordinance for that comes forward, I'll have a presentation and information available for people to take. So I just wanted to get the ball rolling. So, okay.
All right. That's it.
Thank you.
We stand adjourned 8:16 p.m. and we'll see you next Tuesday after Labor Day.